Good evening, everyone. We're moving rapidly towards the end of First Samuel, and we are at chapter 28 today. Now, chapter 28 follows on from chapter 27 yesterday, and it came to a point where David came to seek refuge with Achish, the king of Gath, a Philistine. And at the same time, David found grace in the eyes of Achish, and he gave Achish gave David the town of Ziklag. Now, in chapter 28, verse 1, it says, "It came about in those days where the Philistines would be waging war against Israel. The Philistines gathered their armed camps for war. Their camps are together. They want to make war and they want to fight against Israel. Now, the idea of fight, as you know, it is to wage war, right? Wage war. And you only wage war when you know you are stronger. And then Achish says to David, "Know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men." And so this was the desire of Achish, that David and his men, this is David and his men, 600 of them, is expected to go out with me, Achish, uh, in the camp to the battle. Verse 2, David said to Achish, he says, "Very well. Therefore, you shall know what your servant can do." Now, this word, lakaim, although it's translated as very well, it should be translated as therefore or on this account. Meaning, in this particular instance, and you will know what exactly your servant your servant uh, can do or will do, right? Can do or will do, both are equally good. This is an imperfect verb, basically to tell Akish, well, if you bring us all together, then you will see what I'm made of. And so Akish says to David, again, now this word very well literally means on this account. Because of this, then Akish wishes to make you my bodyguard for life. Now, this is a very important, how should we, this is a very important phrase. This demonstrates how much Akish trusts David. This is about Akish trusts David. And how much does Akish trust David? Well, be my bodyguard. Now, the word my bodyguard is one who is keeping or guarding my head. That is that is how the Hebrew is phrased. My bodyguard is one who is keeping my head. It is that close. I mean, in today's language, bodyguard means to take a bullet for you. Now, in those days, it would be taking care of the king's head. And it says for life. The word for life, uh, it is all the time. He's besides the king. All the time. For all the day. Basically, this is the word. All the day. And so this really demonstrates the confidence of Achish on David. Verse 3 tells us again something that had happened a couple of chapters ago. Now, Samuel was dead. Yes, Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah. Now, what does this in his own city actually mean? If you take a look at the structure of this sentence, it literally means that all Israel had lamented him in his own city, that each went back to their own city to lament after they had buried him in Ramah. That's how it should read. And Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. Now, these two words, let me just explain this a little bit because we will need to get to this point. First of all, understand that it was Saul who had removed. Remove means turned away. Do not let them be in the land. Those who were mediums. Now, the word mediums here would be the necromancers. The spiritists are those diviners using the Gidoa bone. Now, I know you think that, well, this is only one word. Well, where do we get the rest of the words? Well, the word Gidoa bone is actually the name, the word that the word spiritus is being translated from. And it is about divining using a bone. Divining means to seek answers from another realm. Necromancers are those who are able to speak on or contact the dead. That is what the mediums are. Now, at this point in time, we need to be aware of some of the issues regarding mediums and spiritists. The necromancers or spiritists are the ones who can appear to speak in a tone. And now remember, all these words are not job roles. All these words are in Hebrew, really describe the visual and the audible description of the person. And so a soothsayer or a medium or a necromancer is actually understood as one, how should we say, as one who can gain experience, through knowing things or seeing things. That would be a good way of expressing. Now, what they see need not be what it is. And so we are only looking at the effects of such persons. Spiritus here means that these are people who are looking for answers using a bone. Right? That's all I think we need to talk about. Now, I want us to go and swing by Deuteronomy chapter 18. And then we will read a passage there, and then we'll come back to chapter 28. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, and reading from verse 10 onwards, 10 to 14, we just briefly read this. Moses talks to the children of Israel and says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium," now that's the word, "or a spiritist, and one who calls up the dead. Now, all of these, we are particularly interested in this part here. The one who is calling up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these detestable things, the Lord God will drive them out before you. So God wants to get rid of these people from the land. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Now, to be blameless, you should be spotless. That would be the idea here. You should have no fault. And how shall you have no fault? You shall not have any of those mentioned above. And verse 14, for those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft, diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. What does this mean is this: people who do not know God look for something more supernatural to derive answers and look for directions. As for Israel, they are not to do that because their direction comes from the Lord your God. Now, that is the whole principle of not having any of these things. Not to say that these things are real, but these are things that the people of the land then that they are to dispossess actually depends on such people. Now, whether these people are doing what is real has no bearing in our interpretation. So let me just give you briefly the fact that what they do is false and what they do is fake. Now, what does that mean? The Bible talks about idols. And God says, do not follow idols. Do not listen to what they say. You shall have no other gods before me. But we all know that these idols are really nothing. They are stones. They can't tell you what to do. But the language that God uses, do not follow after these gods. Do not listen to these gods. You shall have no other gods before me. I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God. Now, what I'm trying to say is this, that while we know that the idols are false gods, it is the attitude of men that turns away from Jehovah, their God, and follow after the other things that will distract them from the Lord, their God. That would be the utmost bad thing to do. So all these mediums, diviners, speaking to the dead, they are not real. But people do turn to them. And when they turn to them, they do not depend on God. And that is why Israel has been warned. Now we'll take a look at one more passage in Leviticus chapter 20. In chapter 20, verse 6, it says, as for the person who turns to mediums and to spiritists to play the harlot after their meaning, they take them as people who have some sort of a supernatural means of telling them what to do. They are going to treat them as Elohim, as God, and play the harlot. I will also set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. Understand this. To cut him off is to remove, to terminate, to put an end. God doesn't want people like that. You shall consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And so, what is God trying to say is, do not turn to mediums, spiritists, and play the harlot, because Israel is supposed to be holy, special, different from all the other nations, because they have Jehovah, your God. And right at the bottom of this chapter, verse 27, now a man or a woman who is a medium or a spiritist shall be put to death. Now, this is really what we call very serious. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. God is saying, if you do this, you will die. This is the judgment. You will die. All right, so let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 28. This is about Saul having removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists, and that is the right thing to do. So Saul did right. Now, this is important because it comes back to us at the later part of this chapter. The Philistines gathered together, came and camped in Shunem. Right? This is the name of the place in Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel together and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, wow, he was afraid. Like how man is supposed to be afraid of God, Saul was afraid of the Philistines, and his heart trembled greatly. So this is an A and this is a B. Being afraid is demonstrated by his heart quaking, right? Quaking. His heart is trembling like an earthquake. He's so anxious of everything, doesn't know what to do now in verse 5. So in verse 6, it says, Saul inquired of the Lord. The word inquired is to ask. So he decided to ask God. And by right, asking God is the right thing to do. However, you find that as he asked of God, God did not answer him either by dreams or by Urim and Thummim or by prophets. Now understand this. One is when he is praying to God to ask God for directions. God did not respond to him either in a dream, which is generally how God connects with the our world. With the prophet, with the priest, the high priest will use the Urim and Thummim, but he couldn't because he killed all of them at Noth. And now the ephod is actually with David. By the prophets, there were prophets there and nobody wanted to talk to him. And so this is basically saying that Saul is isolated. Now we can see this in 1 Samuel chapter 15, when God says, I do not want you on the throne. And Samuel told him, I would not be seeing you again. So that we are clear that even when Saul asks of God, God is ignoring him completely. Can God do that? Obviously. He has already passed his judgment and he's not about to overturn that judgment. The Saul never did repent. And so Samuel said, I would not be seeing you again. And so he can't see Samuel. So there were other prophets, but the other prophets had no indicator to Saul. Now look at what Saul did. Saul said to his servants, go look for me a woman who is a medium. A woman who is a medium. A woman who can speak to the dead, right? Speak to the dead. Why? So that I may go to her and inquire of her. So instead of inquiring of the Lord, he wants to inquire of a necromancer. Now we read already in Deuteronomy 18 that they're not supposed to do that. We read already in Leviticus chapter 20. They are to be holy, for I am holy. You're not supposed to deal with anyone whom you think will replace God. But Saul is going to do that. So his servant said to him, yes, look, there is one woman who is a necromanceress, manceress, or I guess we can call that, at Endor. Now, Endor is a place which, how should we say, it's in the, it's north of Tavor, towards the Galilee area, the south of the Galilee area. And so this was what Saul wanted to do, look for her. Verse 8, Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes. Disguise means don't want to be seen as Saul. He is already attired to go for war, and so he is now not looking like a king leading the war. So he went, he and his 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night so that nobody could see them. And he said, look at what he says, conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. Now, this word conjure up means to call. I think we can say that. I think we can say that to call up the dead and bring up. Bring up is cause to, well, I guess you can say cause to come up. And so these 2 phrases, I guess, conjure up for me and bring up for me, is the same concept using 2 different words. And so we can say this is an A and a B. This idea is to bring up from the ground the one who is dead. Right? That's the whole picture. And Saul is going to give her a name. In verse 9, but the woman said to him, look, you know what Saul has done and how he has cut off those who are medium spirits from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? Why are you setting a trap for me? Now, this word cut off is the same word to cut off in verse 9. The idea being to cause to how should we say, cause to remove. I think this would be a better word to use. The word cut off means that he has caused to remove all of those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. So she is lying low, not practicing anymore. So why are you coming to see me? That is what verse 9 is talking about. Verse 10, Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, this is bold words, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. The assumption that Saul is making is that if there is any punishment, then it will go to Saul. Saul is actually making a vow to shield her from God's wrath. And so she says, the woman then says, so who do you want me to call up for you? And he says, and that would be the shocker, bring up Samuel for me. Now, in verse 11, we are going to take a quick detour because Samuel has died, and we have read in verse 3 again, the second time, Samuel died, all Israel mourned for him, and buried him in Ramah. And so when it says bring up Samuel, we're assuming now that Samuel has died, and they're trying to call Samuel up from the dead. Now let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Now, in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, we read of this, and this will be prevalent in the minds of the reader of the Hebrew text. It says that the dust will return to the earth as it was. This is the body will return to the ground. Now, the second part is that the spirit will return to God who gave it. And so this would be the ruach, the wind, and this will be the dust to go back to the earth, to the ground. Now, what this means is God gave it to every living creature, and in this case, the man. And as a man dies, the concept of man dying, at least in the Hebrew text, and when they are reading the Hebrew text, they will understand that when a person dies, he is buried in the ground and it becomes dust. And so it goes into the ground. The second part of it is that his wind, right? Or we call it the spirit, returns to God. And that would be the picture of how a person would be. So if Samuel had died, this would be a picture of how that would look like. Now let's go back. Verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, and this is important, let's do this slowly so you can all see. The woman saw Samuel. So the woman can see. And then she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And so, how did the woman recognize Samuel? So the king said to her, do not be afraid, but what do you see? Now, the woman is the one seeing, and the woman said to Saul, I see. Now, this is where we're going to have a little bit of challenge in the translation. I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. Now, in the Hebrew, the Hebrew doesn't quite say this. Okay, the Hebrew says, I see, or I have seen angels ascending from the land. Now, this is where we are having some challenges. It says here, a divine being, and it gives us a connotation as if there is only one coming out. And here I have indicated in the Hebrew, it says angels, and it is in the plural. Now, this word here is Elohim. So Elohim right here is in the plural. It is in the plural right here, Elohim. So I'm not hiding anything from you. And those of you who know Hebrew, you can actually check this out. It says, I have seen Elohim ascending from the land, coming out of the ground. So Elohim being plural. And in this case, it refers to angels, not God himself, but angels. And it would be at least two, right? At least two, not one. And so I would find that it is strange why the English would infer singular when it's plural. And the word divine beings is fine. Angels. It is angels coming out of the ground. Understand that it is not Samuel coming out of the ground. Verse 14, he said to her. Now notice, all these conversations shows us two things. All right. We have Saul, we have the woman. The woman can see. Saul cannot see. That's what is happening, right? What is his form? How does he look like? And she said, an old man is coming up. Now, this is in verse 14. An old man is coming out. So it looks like an old man, and he is wrapped with a robe. Now, how is it that they can't recognize Samuel's face? They only recognize an old man. It could be any old man, and he has a robe, which Samuel does have a robe. So he does have a signature clothing. And we are told that Saul knew that it was Shemuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. Now, what exactly did he do is that he would immediately, and this is Saul would just bow to the ground, hands out, and he is the king, right? And this is to pay homage and pay obeisance. And this is what the English would translate as worship. And there is an old man coming out of the ground, right? And it looks like an old man, right? Not necessarily is an old man. It looks like an old man. And Saul assumes, right? The word knew here doesn't necessarily mean that he actually can see. He couldn't see. He assumes that it was Samuel, right? He assumes it was Samuel. In verse 15, it says, then Samuel said to Saul, the text continues that assumption that the old man that the woman saw was Samuel. And Samuel said to Saul, now this is another thing that we can look at, that Saul can hear. The woman cannot hear. All right. So we have some peculiarities right now. So this is what we can say. Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me and no longer answers me. This is a very important phrase. God has departed from me and no longer answers me. This is God is true to his word, because he says, I am not going to reply you anymore, either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore, I have called you that you may make known to me what I should do. Now, this is an assumption. So we saw two angels coming up, and one of them takes on the role of Samuel. Now, understand what angels are for, right? Malach. Malach is one who walks on behalf of another. And so in this case, you find that the Malach is translated as angels, is also translated as messenger. And so this angel comes up and brings this message as if it was from Samuel, but so it wasn't Samuel coming back. That's how I would read this. And Samuel said, then why then do you ask me? Since the Lord has departed from you and has become your opponent. Right? This is how it's read. The Lord has turned away from you and has become your opponent, or has become supporter of your opponent. Meaning God has turned to the other side to go against Saul. And so Samuel said, why do you ask of me? I have nothing to do with you anymore, because God will not speak to you, and so neither would I. Verse 17, the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 15. And so you need to go back and read that. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and have given it to your neighbor, to David. This is the first time that David's name is spoken. What does that mean? It means that when God brought Samuel to anoint David, although the situation was such that David was anointed, but nobody seems to know that it was David. What people may know is that there is a likely person that would take over from Saul, and there was an anointing, but everybody has kept it rather quiet, and God has never spoken and never said anything to Saul about this at all. And so now God is speaking, and God is bringing this message through the angels, the Elohim that came up from the ground, that your kingdom will be given to David. As you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this to you today. Why? Because God says, you don't listen to me. Why should I listen to you? And so 1 Samuel 15 holds true. Verse 19, moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Now, this is a very serious situation. Will give over Israel means Israel will lose the battle. Not only Israel will lose the battle, you into the hands of the Philistines. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. This is a way of saying, I shall see you, right? You will join me. So this would imply that they will die because Samuel is dead. So indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. This is very, very important for us to understand, because this is the last message to Saul. And this message is not what he was looking for. And because of that, it really traumatized him. Verse 20. Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground, was very terrified because of the words of Samuel. Now, we are also assuming it's Samuel. It would be one of the angels that came out, the Elohim, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day, all night. So partly because he was weakened by no food, but then he was stricken by fear that he is going to die. Very seldom in the Bible does God actually predict and give this message to somebody that, no, you are going to die. And that, when you hear that from a supernatural source like this one, he has lost all mood completely. Yeah, he has lost all mood. Verse 21, the woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified. It says, behold, your maidservant has obeyed you. I've listened to what you want me to do. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to your words which you spoke to me. So why are you doing this? You asked me to do it. So now also please listen to the voice of your maidservant. I have told you what I have seen. Now listen to my voice. Let me give you some food that you may eat. You have strength and you can go away. But he refused and says, I will not eat. He's like a spoiled brat, really. But mainly because he's now stricken with fear that for the first time in his life, death is going to be very real. However, his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to them. He arose from the ground, sat on the bed. Our final two verses, the woman had a fattened calf. She slaughtered it, took flour, made unleavened bread from it, so there is food. She brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. They arose and went away that night. That is the whole episode of chapter 28. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.